Hello everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissil, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. So we have a two-parter today. We'll be covering UFOs and USOs. And we do have some photos from the book to cover. So we will do that when the time comes. But as always, make sure to drop a like down below. And if you have anything to say in the comments, don't be shy. Let's have a conversation. All we're trying to do is find answers to the mysteries of the world. So chapter 8 is titled Worlds Above, Worlds Below. So we're going to be talking about UFOs and USOs. And I think it's going to be a fun show. Alright, let's get that Illuminati in here. Come on. Where are you at? There we go. Our trusty Illuminati discovered roads on the bottom of the ocean. It could only mean one thing, right? Evidence of a great flood. But let's begin. And again, make sure to hit the like button and share your comments. I'd love to have a conversation here. So chapter 8, Worlds Above, Worlds Beneath. For the last 70 years, the existence of UFOs in the atmosphere of the Earth is undisputed, though the origin of these UFOs remains hotly debated, and the debate itself often ridiculed as applying only to the realm of dreamers and fantasists, despite astronauts, generals, admirals, even heads of state participating lively in the discussions and even declaring their firm belief in the existence of UFOs as more than just unidentified flying objects, the literal meaning of the acronym, but specifically endorsing UFOs as that which many have either worried or alternatively hoped spaceships from another planet. Conspiracy theories and the occult aside, if the pro-ET theorists are right that the UFOs are from another planet, then their decided lack of communicating with the inhabitants of Earth over the last 70 years or perhaps longer gives rise to some disturbing theories about the extraterrestrial occupants' regard for mankind. Occult adherents would have us believe that they have been in communication with the ET entities, either physically or more often telepathically. Favored and unverifiable method, or the favored and unverifiable method of communication in the occult. Outside of the fringe, there still resides in believers a deep certainty that UFOs are solid spacecraft, some unmanned probes, but most with inhabitants, relatively small in stature and likely insectoid in makeup. Yep. Believers include scientists, often Air Force pilots of almost every nation on Earth, politicians, and members of almost every national security defense program, NASA engineers, and astronauts. It is a remarkable tribute to the more disciplined nature of these vocations that UFOs are referred to within their discussions by the more outdated term, quote, flying saucer, end quote. A term that is simply accurate no matter what cartoon image it eventually came to conjure. Let's think about that for a second. Think of all the different people in different levels of government that have admitted to seeing these things firsthand. And we can debate that a lot of this is from our own governments. It's like mystery spacecraft, or aircraft, or watercraft. But it can't be all of them. There's some here that are very unexplainable. But let's get back to the reading here. Witnesses to UFO sightings invariably describe them as saucer-shaped. Over time, a pattern has even emerged. Small discs of about 2 feet diameter, silvery chrome in appearance, have stalked and paced aircraft and rocket launches. Larger ones of about 30 to 60 feet in diameter are the most frequently seen and may contain crewmen. Then there are those that are at least 100 feet in diameter and possibly ovoid in shape. Rocket-shaped UFOs of the same length have also been seen. However, these too are most likely ovoid, and when seen from the side, they have a flattened rocket look, the observer having assumed an overall cylindrical shape to the craft, an optical mistake easy to make, especially considering the state of shock the observer is immediately in after seeing one unexpectedly. And according to some, there are those that are huge, quote, cigar-shaped, end quote, UFOs, so large they are dubbed, quote, motherships, end quote, because they are proposed to be intergalactic super carriers. Reports of flying saucers were so concise and numerous beginning on June 24th, 1947, with Idaho pilot Ken Arnold reporting 9 disc-like objects flying along Mount Rainier in Washington state, that they were unequivocally accepted by the U.S. Air Force as real. Released Air Force documents contemporary to this period reveal an unhesitant certainty, while at the same time reflecting a healthy skepticism, that they were Russian experimental craft built by captured Nazi technology. Some holders of impressive rank expressed their suspicion they were a U.S. secret project, but one carried out by a compartmentalized branch of aeronautics so that they were unknown to the various Air Force field commands, those who were most frequently fielding the reports and questions about sightings. Such a reserve ranked number 1 on the list of General Nathan Twining, head of Air Material Command, when he assessed their origins to intelligence. Soon, however, it became apparent UFOs were not only not a U.S. black project, it became apparent UFOs were also not Soviet in origin. It is perhaps a humorous and forgivable quirk of human nature that the Air Force, some of whose highest-ranking members endorsed the existence of flying saucers based on the clarity and multiplicity of sightings, now insisted they didn't exist. Obviously, the evidence had not changed. What had changed were the options for UFO origins. The options now included everything but extraterrestrial entities. Because of the prohibitive distance of intergalactic space, with flight times longer than a lifetime to get to Earth from the closest solar system, an origin from outer space was considered impossible. In short, the only alternative origin was not considered possible. So the reports of flying saucers that were once so clear were no longer considered to have been that clear and irrefutable. The new Air Force attitude was innocent enough, but the early documents wherein officers expressed a pro-attitude after their release to the public decades later have only served to foster the notion that conspiracies and cover-ups brought about the change in attitude. To conspiracy theorists, the new goal of the Air Force was to keep silent the truth about extraterrestrials visiting Earth, but decidedly not deigning to communicate openly with its inhabitants, a haughty and sinister implication. Some of the released documents from 1947 contain a frank exchange between Brigadier General George Shulgin of Intelligence and General Nathan Twining, in which Twining tells him plainly that the, quote, phenomenon is real, end quote. The context, however, between the two is clearly that flying saucers exist in the vein of Russian secret weapons, which General Shulgin had suspected from the beginning. Since no plot is too far-fetched for intelligence personnel, Shulgin's theory included that perhaps a rogue group of Nazi scientists, who included some of those taken by the U.S. at the close of World War II, were applying their knowledge to the German group of scientists taken by the USSR after conquering Germany. A number of claims were circulating both in the popular press and within more restrictive channels that pieces of these, quote, flying discs, unquote, or small versions of flying saucers had dropped to Earth or had been discovered, abandoned, and out of power, and naturally had been collected by those who had found them. Shulgin wanted every piece that had been retrieved, and even wanted the FBI to step in and investigate. Tracing the origins of the metals of these discs and the method of manufacture would obviously be something the FBI could do, an organization that otherwise has no edge in anything avionic or aerospace in nature. A memo with J. Edgar Hoover's handwritten response was later released into the public domain. On the memo, one assistant advised him to acquiesce to Shulgin's request, and another wrote to refrain, forewarning that most of these cases of recovered discs had been, quote, pranks, end quote. Hoover, however, wrote he was disposed to do it, adding the codicil that the FBI must have access to, quote, all discs discovered, end quote, complaining that one had been grabbed by the Army, and they wouldn't even let the FBI have a cursory examination of it. It seems nothing came of the FBI's involvement, because soon enough the Air Force dispensed with Shulgin's theory that flying saucers were Russian in origin, essentially therewith dropping the idea of the FBI needing to investigate what must be material left by pranksters and a phenomena that was largely a misidentification of known objects. For those within the military who still believed flying saucers were real, they believed them to be interstellar spacecraft, and the FBI was obviously of no use in proving this point. Admirals and generals joined retired Major Donald Kehoe's Civilization UFO organization, NICAP, which developed into a credible reporting and investigating body to follow up on flying saucer reports, independent of and in a more open manner than which its members felt the Air Force was doing in its own various projects, which eventually coalesced into Project Blue Book. Based on the continuing reports of sightings by credible observers, each member of NICAP was spurred on to believe that flying saucers were from outer space. These observers included pilots, scientists, and qualified individuals who understood azimuth, distance, and the various degrees of light, etc., all which made it easier for the investigator with the same knowledge to assess the observed actions of the UFO in the sky. Many of these observed UFO actions continued to defy any explanation from an earthly standpoint. No conventional craft could make the maneuvers that the flying saucers were seen to do, such as right-angle turns at a high rate of speed, sometimes in excess of thousands of miles per hour, hover, ascend with incredible but silent liftoff, and as it became repeatedly clear, no earthly government had any saucer-shaped aircraft. Some were observed so high up by Air Force pilots as to be traveling in low orbit. Flocks or squadrons of flying saucers were observed more than once by Air Force pilots, including astronaut Gordon Cooper, while flying with his squadron over Germany. What can only be called a flock was captured on the, quote, Utah film, end quote, taken on July 2nd, 1952 by Delbert Newhouse of the U.S. Navy. Two glowing saucers moved smoothly against the wind in the, quote, Montana film, end quote, taken on August 15th, 1950 by Nick Mariana in Great Falls, Montana. Both films were examined by the military and said to contain genuine flying objects. I'd like to take a look at those real quick. I wasn't prepared to pull those up, but I think we need to take a look at those. Hey, Frankie D, good to see you here. We are going over UFOs and USOs today. Alright, let's see what we got for the Utah film. Oh. Okay, so we got both of them here. Let's pull this up. So we'll get rid of the Illuminati for a minute. And, yeah, just bear with me for a moment here. We'll have to give credit to this channel Lappy, man. He's got about the same amount of subscribers as I do here. So let's watch this. Hey, Missing Time, good to see you. So this is the Montana film from 1950. This is going to run about 5 minutes. I believe this is my first time watching this as well, so we're all here together watching this. You know, this reminds me of the lights in the sky that I saw at night in Texas. Where you can see it has like dimensional shape to it. And I wonder where the original film reels of this are. It would be nice to get this cleaned up. Get all the dust and scratches off. But then, you know, people would say, oh, it's AI. It's really hard these days to figure out what's what. At least we know this is as authentic as you can get in terms of government-released footage. But the book says here, both films were examined by the military and said to contain genuine flying objects. Oh, there's a whole group of them there. And you know, back in the 50s, I believe it was really rare to have film cameras on board, whether you're an Air Force pilot or out at sea. So really, we don't have too many clips like this for the Bermuda Triangle either, because even if they did have something of a camera that was running off of batteries or something, it would just get shut off. The electromagnetic interference, I'd say it would seize up some of these cameras too from even running. And we're talking film cameras too. Now there are film cameras like the Bolex where it's all spring based. You just wind it up, then you push a button and it slowly unwinds it and it moves the film through. Personally, that's what I would have brought to the moon if we were to have gone up there, was bring a Bolex camera. The tension of a coil that's wound up and then released, that would bypass any electromagnetic interference in my mind. And this is good that they have it start, like stopping, starting. So the Utah film, this is the one that has a bunch of objects. You see this? Whereas the Montana film, a few years prior, it was what, 2? Yeah, it looks very similar to what I saw in the night sky last year in Texas. Except they were all flying to a certain point on the horizon above the trees. The light would come on, it would be traveling, it looks like a plane or a moving star, and then it just fades out. We got about 20 seconds left of this. The wild thing is we still see similar things today. Like, it hasn't really changed shape or anything. Okay. Let's get back. Let's get back to reading here. But thank you for being here. I appreciate it. In the chronology of the phenomenon, the most disturbing reports are those that continued to not only show flying saucers to be real, but to be following a disquieting pattern of checking our defense and aerospace installations. Flying saucers were seen most frequently by staff at key air bases and by those at missile defense and testing bases. In a rare moment of transparency, this fact was published in a national magazine. U.S. Navy Commander Robert McLaughlin was the first military officer from the development side of research to have an article cleared, perhaps by accident, which appeared in True magazine in March 1950. In the article, he describes the actions of saucers over White Sands missile proving grounds in New Mexico, where he worked on top-secret projects. Not only were these flying saucers observed by sight, but also tracked by theodolite, ruling out illusions, hallucinations, or autokinesis on the part of the observers. So really quickly, I want to see the definition for theodolite. It's a surveying tool, precision optical instrument for measuring angles. So it measures from vertical and horizontal. So they were tracking them with that. Noting that they observed two 20-inch diameter discs follow a rocket from launch and through its course, McLaughlin is perhaps the first to inadvertently or intentionally suggest that the inhabitants of such craft could only be insects in order to fit in something that small. However, in a more serious way, he suggested that only insectoids were designed to man any of the saucers, including the huge ones. That's really notable it's very notable to all of this. I'll reread that. However, in a more serious way, he suggested that only insectoids were designed to man any of the saucers, including the huge ones. Theodolite picked up and tracked one saucer, which he and his companions then visually observed. They estimated it to be a 105-foot diameter ovoid disc. Unlike the smaller saucers, the big ones remained high up in the atmosphere. The saucer was traveling quickly and then ascended after sudden stops, maneuvers that required any living thing inside to be able to absorb terrific G-force. McLaughlin noted that a bee can pull 20 Gs, the amount of pull which anything inside the saucer would have experienced from its observed maneuvers. So that makes sense. But then we're talking about the larger craft too having insectoids inside it, so that would mean human-sized insects. So predominant was the idea that only insects could man the saucers that General Hurd proposed the alien inhabitants were, quote, super bees, end quote, from Mars in his book Is Another World Watching, published by Bantam in 1953. But there is a great difference between, quote, super insect, end quote, and insectoid. As a, quote, $1 a year man, end quote, Dr. Robert Sarbacher, spelled Sarbacher, worked in conjunction with many government projects in the early 1950s. Whether he picked up the, quote, water cooler, end quote, Pentagon chat about theoretical insectoid origins of the flying saucer inhabitants, or had direct statements from those in the, quote, need to know, end quote, he later asserted that a flying saucer had actually crashed and the occupants were retrieved and were in fact insectoid in makeup. His recollections have been used to foster the legend of a UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico. But if true, always if, then it could explain why the UFO nauts have never made contact. Sorry about that. Insects and humans cannot communicate with each other. I try to catch me coughing and muting. Doesn't always happen. Thanks to the work of the late Dr. Karl von Frisch, the language of the bees is the most understood and, to an extent, translated language mankind has of any species other than himself. However, it does not change the fact that bees cannot communicate with mankind or mankind with the bees. To draw a biblical analogy, we are like God sitting upon the dome of the earth and watching mankind move about like grasshoppers. Scientists have observed the bees as far more dispassionate entities than anything godlike and watched them communicate with each other, but they cannot intellectually bridge the gulf between them or any insect species. Despite the impressive collective intelligence of the bees, and many other insects, there most likely is no real individual intelligence with which to communicate. Like all insects, each bee is an individual cell in a body. There are no philosophers or independent thinkers. All insects follow a stifling behavioral pattern which they cannot break. They act in tandem to bring about the benefits of the hive or nest. There is little reason to consider that a highly developed insectoid species would be significantly different and free of its behavioral pattern. In fact, considering the intelligence level of insects on Earth, it would be likely that the next most intelligent species in the universe to mankind would be insectoid. But this intelligence would be a conglomerate intelligence, like thousands of cells forming an organ, not an intelligence that is ever directed outward except for scouting, hunting, offense, and defense. Praise is heaped upon the chimp and dolphin, but it is nevertheless true that they are practically morons compared with the collective intelligence of ants and bees. The most intelligent creatures do not blindly follow a master and, quote, ape, end quote, what they are shown. And yet, it is this behavior in both chimps and dolphins that make us classify them as intelligent. Insects cannot be manipulated, either individually or collectively. It is as equally true that the intelligence of insects is a collective one, and no individual breaks free of it to act on its own. I believe there's a spelling error here. This is a first edition book, so it's going to happen. A large, highly developed species could represent a threat to mankind. They would operate according to behavioral programming, but be a developed, cohesive culture like humankind. Despite the metaphysical nature of the UFO debate, flying saucer behavior can best be explained only through the lenses that have watched and studied insects. Flying saucers display an insect's complete lack of interest in mankind and a behavioral pattern which may have a very disquieting goal. That the earth is more or less like a flower to them, to be gleaned in springtime and in harvest. That's really something to think about. There hasn't been contact because these things are insectoid, and they have no intelligence like we do. So they're just here to look at the flowers. But I think there's more to that. There's more to it than just that. Until modern times, records were not so meticulous regarding human travel and census. Therefore, it is not possible to assess whether the alarming rate of human disappearance each year is out of proportion with the past. It is, however, a given that humans are better documented from birth to death in the world today, and yet tens of thousands still disappear each year without trace. A veritable major city population, just taking into account the last 20 years. Yeah, think about that. It's still happening even though we're documenting people from birth to death. Accepting merely for the sake of argument that aliens could be visiting this planet but have no ability or inclination to communicate with its inhabitants, a highly developed insectoid species would still have interest in its own self-preservation and would therefore take a keen interest in the aggressive capability of Earth's inhabitants. After seeing there was little threat to them, they would then go about gathering the pollen, so to speak, that they desire, which some fear could be us. Such a thought is anathema to the entire modern UFO experience, which has preferred to paint a rather rosy picture of UFO inhabitants as angelic in nature and having a very benign or even altruistic purpose for mankind, conditioning us and preparing us for greater galactic love. However, the observed behavior of flying saucers has ranged only from indifference to reconnaissance, and on some occasions to what appears to be outright aggression, nothing beyond the pattern of highly developed but still conditioned insects. While all this resides only in theory, there appears to be no doubt about the existence of flying saucers, the instigating factor of all UFO theories. Their behavior must have some consistent interpretation that fits their observed pattern for the last 70 years. They have been seen, tracked on radar, and even observed to have landed, even at official bases, and yet without any attempted contact. One of the most alarming examples of the latter happened at Edwards Air Force Base in 1957, when a 20-foot diameter saucer landed on the far edge of the desert testing area and was filmed by a crew that was there already to film some other experimental work. This film was developed and given to their commander, future astronaut Gordon Cooper, who looked at the negatives and later admitted it was a clear film of a, quote, double saucer lenticular, end quote, craft that had put down a tripod landing gear and briefly landed. The film was immediately sent to Washington, D.C., and its whereabouts thereafter have been lost. Over the last 70 years, the narrative has developed, and within its strict perimeters, the discussion remains, with emphasis coming and going from various new chapters as the marketing of UFOlogy has evolved, each chapter advancing from sightings to contactees to abductions to pseudo-religious cults and popular mythology, each becoming viable from a sales point of view only after the other chapter had become oversold and no longer of interest to the public. This is counterbalanced by prosaic, often humbugged debunkers who seem less sincere than believers, and far more interested in profiting off naysaying for attention, or gain as much, if not more, so than those believers they accuse of creating their own cottage industries. To the observer, it seems the believers are quite sincere, and this represents a more frightening proposal considering the vast cult they have forged out of nothing more empiric to the rest of us than indifference on the part of silver discs in our atmosphere. That is, their indifference with human culture. UFOs have a preoccupation with the oceans or any remote location, a pattern that should really be viewed as confirming their overall indifference with us. Skeptics appear even more dangerous for another reason. They will not only deny the pattern seen in genuine UFO reports, but try to intimidate others from considering the possibility UFOs exist outside of the oppressive formula laid down by marketing, rather than encouraging a serious look at whether the phenomenon is real. After facing skeptics, one comes away with the same characterization as presented by the late French general Lionel Max Chassin, when he penned in the foreword of Flying Saucers and the Straight Line Mystery by Amy Michel. And that's spelled AIME MICHEL. Here's the excerpt. Obsessed with the notion of his own omniscience, it enrages him to be confronted with phenomena that do not agree with this conviction. Finding in his limited armory no explanation that satisfies him, he chooses to doubt rather than himself and rejects the most obvious facts in order to avoid putting his faith to the test. The mistaken pride and anthropocentrism. Let's try that one more time. Anthropocentrism. That supposedly went out with the Copernicus and Galileo. Make him a peril to science, as history abundantly proves. That strange things have been seen is now beyond question, and the psychological explanations seem to have misfired. The number of thoughtful, intelligent, educated people in full possession of their faculties who have seen something and described it grows every day. Doubting Thomases among astronomers, engineers, and officials who used to laugh at saucers have seen and repented. To reject out-of-hand testimony such as theirs becomes more and more presumptuous. That's the end of that. It is a fact that in its attempts to overcome the space distance barrier, theoretical physics has been advanced by a culture that allowed itself to be immersed in at least the discussion of UFOs and their possible existence, despite the concept violating our current understanding of the limitations of space travel. Flying saucers, in essence, have become like portents of old, directing us, even in our disbelief, to consider the shape of a saucer in aerodynamics and any number of quantum theories on bending space and the use of wormholes. Perhaps just the ideas of UFOs have inspired, or perhaps just the ideas UFOs have inspired will make it possible that we can travel to other planets in a quick and efficient way on a regular basis, progress that no naysayer is capable of inspiring. Despite the personal unbelief for many in aerospace, there are many who believe, either from their own personal encounter or after having assessed the total and reliable data available. University of Nebraska's Dr. David Pares, spelled P-A-R-E-S, is an example of the former. Because of his encounter as a teenager, to be discussed later, he accepted that some other form than conventional rocketry must explain the presence of flying saucers. Eventually, many factors led him to believe it was based on the bending of space. In putting it in simple terms, he observes, quote, originally proposed by Miguel Alcubierre in 1994. This last name is spelled A-L-C-U-B-I-E-R-R-E. The concept of space warp, which is a method of stretching space in a wave which would in theory cause the fabric of space ahead of a spacecraft to contract and the space behind it to expand. The ship would ride this wave inside a region known as a local warp bubble of flat space. End quote. The result would be that impressive distances could be achieved, some proposing 10 times the speed of light. Light speed would no longer be the limit of speed. Sirius, 9 light years away, would no longer be an 18-year round trip. There would be no bending of space around the spacecraft, and hence no time warping. The crew aboard would not experience only a day's transit, as compared to 18 years elapsing on Earth. Hardy salts and settlers braved the Atlantic for over a month to gain America, and such spans in time now await future travelers to distant planets. Somehow, the current growing conviction that flying saucers are real and from outer space reminds us of the certainty the Air Force upper echelons expressed in the early days of the UFO phenomenon. Flying saucers were here because they were Russians, and therefore they could be here. This underpinning their acceptance of the reports because in this framework they were believable. Since Alcubierre's theory was considered proved in 2012, even NASA prepares its design of spaceships that will create such warp tunnels. For UFO believers, this is considerable justification for their ardor ARDOR over the last 70 years. In essence, flying saucers can be here, and therefore perhaps more serious consideration should be taken to assessing the pattern that disks in the sky have followed, which remains a disturbing one of spectator, indifferent interloper, or even predator when necessary. The first pattern flying saucers displayed was an interest in military bases, indicating a sophisticated intelligence and precaution on the part of those operating them. Then, it should not be reasoned, might not these same inhabitants... Okay, let me restart. Then, should it not be reasoned, might not these same inhabitants have an interest in our spacecraft, or aircraft and ships? If they follow rockets, would they not follow ships and aircraft to determine, if nothing else, the capabilities of these craft? It is precisely with this interpretation that the most credible UFO encounters can be understood, some with very, to say the least, very alarming results. Namely, the result is the total disappearance of the aircraft. This always occurs over the ocean, as if the UFO, to personalize it, doesn't wish to cause the undisputed alarm that would result in our society if an aircraft vanished over land, a pattern which gives a rather insidious and ongoing motive to aliens. The most documented, and as a result, the most famous case is the disappearance of Fred Valentic, last name spelled Valentich, in Bass Straits, south of Australia, an area like the Bermuda Triangle noted for many unusual UFO and USO sightings and disappearances at sea, though the Valentic case is the first time such UFOs were overtly associated with a disappearance. It is the most documented case not because it was investigated when actually it was not, but because before Valentic disappeared, he plainly declared to the radio controller that the strange aircraft pestering him was, quote, not an aircraft. I'm making a note of the Bass Straits in Australia. So that's another one to look into. Valentic had taken off in his light Cessna 180 from Melbourne at 6:19 p.m. the evening of October 21st, 1978, and headed to King Island. After proceeding out into the Straits past Cape Otway, he contacted Melbourne Flight Service. It was now 7:06 p.m. He asked if there was any known aircraft in the vicinity around his altitude of 4,500 feet. Melbourne confirmed there was not. Over the next harrowing few minutes, Valentic continued to relay to Melbourne that some type of large aircraft seemed to be stalking him. Quote, "It seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me 2-3 times at a time at speeds I could not identify." End quote. When Melbourne tried to get a description in detail, Valentic could only say it was so bright it was like a landing light. Then, when it approached again and hovered over him, he was able to say, quote, "It's got a green light and sort of metallic. It's all shiny on the outside." End quote. More than once, he had no choice but to declare, quote, "It is not an aircraft," end quote. Though he would not call it a UFO. Nevertheless, he described it as silvery, large, but of a size difficult to estimate because of its fast speed as it passed. Because of the craft's game of approaching from different directions and then retreating, Valentic had stopped and circled. This is when it too hovered over him. Straining at an angle upward to see it, he was unable to put what he saw any more clearly than, quote, "The thing is just orbiting on top of me," end quote. It then vanished again, or so he thought. It would seem the thing was simply capable of such fast speeds so that when Valentic had turned to look another way, or at his or at his instruments, or to speak to Melbourne, the craft could dart off and effectively seemed to have vanished. One reason why Valentic continued to circle, trying to find it coming and going from any direction. His final words bear quoting. After it had disappeared for the last time, he reported it was coming back at him on a straight line course from the southwest. As it grew nearer, his engine began to cough and lose power. Quote, Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again," end quote. He paused, leaving the microphone open. Then, quote, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft," end quote. His microphone remained open for 17 seconds. Then there was nothing. No trace of Valentic or of his Cessna 180 was ever found. In a strange way, the scenario this incident presents is an incarnation of the theories much earlier proposed about missing aircraft and UFO abduction in the Bermuda Triangle. It is so evident as to almost make the theory seem more of a prophecy. Prediction is a key step in scientific method, made powerful when there is fulfillment. Years before this incident, without any real proof, merely based on the circumstantial evidence, theorists had proposed that only alien abduction could explain the missing aircraft and ships in the triangle, though none of them predicted it as vividly as it was displayed in the Valentic disappearance a world away. More to the point, however, this very disquieting incident is not proof from afar. Until 1992, it was not known that a nearly identical disappearance had occurred in the Bermuda Triangle, off the west coast of Puerto Rico. Until this represent writer discovered it in the files of the National Transportation Safety Board. The flight had taken place on June 28, 1980. Jose Maldonado Torres was flying the light Aircoupe N3808H from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, to San Juan, Puerto Rico. His passenger was Jose Pagan Santos, the son of the owner of the aircraft, Jose Pagan Jimenez, an aero police officer of Puerto Rico. Approaching the west coast of Puerto Rico, Torres' alarmed voice came over the radio frequencies. Quote, "Mayday, Mayday," end quote. The object of his angst, quote, "We can see a strange object in our course. We are lost. Mayday, Mayday." And then 25 seconds later, "Mayday, Mayday, we are lost. We found a strange object in our course," end quote. Over the next couple of minutes, Iberia Flight 976 and San Juan International tried to understand what was happening. Prompted by Iberia Flight, Torres responded, "We are going from Santo Domingo to San Juan International, but we found a weird object in our course that made us change course about 3 different times. We got it right now in front of us at 1 o'clock. Our heading is 070 degrees. Our altitude is 1,600 at 070 degrees. Our VORs got lost off frequency," end quote. Continuing communication was marked by considerable alarm, even panic, in Torres' voice. And in the background, one can hear Santos saying, quote, "Look, look," end quote, as he calls his friend's attention to the, quote, "very weird object," end quote. Several evasive courses were executed by Torres, all to no avail. Simply put, the weird object was intentionally keeping Torres from making the coast only 35 miles away. At 1,500 feet altitude now, Torres made yet another course change to avoid it. The result, quote, "We are right again in the same stuff, man," end quote. At 8:07 p.m., the air coupe vanished from Atlantic weapons radar. At 8:15 p.m., a blip reappeared, tracking 266 degrees away from Puerto Rico. It then vanished forever. An unnerving similarity to Valentek's consternation, Torres could only describe what they had encountered as, quote, "We have something weird in front of us that make us lose our course all the time," end quote. In his personal report, Santos's father, Jose Jimenez, who had flown many search missions in his own police helicopter, summed up the weird object as, quote, "Objeto luminoso," or "Objeto luminoso," end quote, or glowing object, drawing yet another unintentional parallel to Valentek's silvery non-aircraft that had manifested first as a bright landing light until it hovered over him and a green light became apparent. So we do have an image from the book here. This says, based on a 070 course to the Aguadilla VOR and the statement that the flight was about 35 miles from the coast, the position of N3808H is plotted within the circle, and the course directions reveal the flight possibly turned around before vanishing. So it's talking about what's up in the top left corner here. It's a map that has the aircraft offshore, like it says here, the 35 miles from the coast, but with two directions going back and forth. So it might have just gone back and forth before vanishing. Similarities between the two incidents can probably be explained by the fact that the same type of object was responsible, and that human reaction, given the unbelievable circumstances, simply cannot take it all in at first. From the transcripts, it would seem that Fred Valentek kept his cool more. However, the Melbourne flight controller, Steve Roby, has stated that the alarm in his voice was very apparent. Neither pilot would call it a flying saucer or UFO. Even if they believed that is what it was, they may have instantly felt that the radio control operator might think this a hoax, despite the tenor of their voice, and not understand how truly urgent it was to them that the tower understand they're in trouble. There is a substantial component missing in these cases, at least on the surface, with the theory to explain alien abduction of aircraft in the Bermuda Triangle. Specifically, there is an enormous logistic problem which any solid entities have to deal with. Aside from the obvious and most disturbing question of all, why? There is the question of how. How to retrieve a large object. In itself, it would seem a rather hard thing to pull off, even for a sophisticated and advanced civilization. So I'm going to divide the chapter here on page 208. We're starting on the next paragraph from what I just finished there. So this will be a shorter show. Hopefully it'll give some of you time to catch up. But next week we'll be reading through 30 pages, so we're going to have to start at 6 next week. Because I would like to cover this within 3 hours next week. Got 30 pages, 3 hours. That's roughly how all this works. But that'll be it for today. Again, I thank you all for being here. Please take care of yourselves. I should be on for another live on Sunday. And we'll continue the Let's Talk About It series. And soon we'll have a few more shows on top of what we currently have going now. So, thanks again, everyone. I appreciate your support. Please remember to drop a like below and share your comments on today's show. But we'll continue this chapter next week. Same time, a little earlier, 6 p.m. I try to hit that 6 p.m. mark, but life gets in the way, you know. So, we're doing our best. But until the next one, class dismissed.